Hello, everybody, and today I'm going to continue my Najdorf series, and we're going to take our first look into the very deep possibilities of the move 6 bishop g5, which is a highly aggressive move. It's been played many times in the past years, from the times of Bobby Fischer and even before to the most current games today, with it's extremely aggressive move for white. There's a lot of very complicated theoretical variations. It's rich in positional ideas, and I'm going to start to take you through them. So white's main point of bishop g5 is to play f4, queen f3, and try to push e5 through. Black has a few ways of reacting to this. In general, the move that's played is e6. There's a sideline move, knight b d7, also very complicated. I could probably dedicate 4 videos to this move alone. I just don't have the time for that. I think white gets an advantage with f4, and if queen b6, queen d2, queen takes b2, it's going to be like a variation we'll see later, but a little bit better for white than normal. So e6 really is the main move here, and now white plays f4. So now there are 2 ways for black to play. One way, although there's different moves for it, is to play things like bishop e7 or knight b d7, trying to reinforce the e5 square or break the pin on this knight on f6, and sort of geared around stopping white from playing e5, and then later playing bishop e7 and b5 and bishop b7. The other way is queen b6. A highly aggressive move. It completely ignores all opening principles. It lets white get basically a pretty serious initiative, but he is going to lose the b2 pawn in these lines. The final idea is queen c7 with the rouser type position, but I'm not as much of a fan of this move. So queen b6, I have never played this move before because I believe that oftentimes, while a computer might say a position is equal or even better for black, an initiative is very easy to play with, and it's, practically speaking, very hard to play these kinds of positions for black. So there's a few things white can do here. The main move, the most popular one, is queen d2, and white is planning to simply castle queenside and get a huge attack. Black has to play queen takes b2, and there's 2 variations here. Knight b3 is a bit uncommon. It's trying to make the queen look silly. And black has to be careful. If he just develops normally, he may run into trouble with something like this, and he just loses his queen. But if black's careful, queen a3 is the best move. It's interesting for sure, but I think that it's not white's best try. White should try rook b1, queen a3. And there's lots of things white can do here. White can do plans where he plays like bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and f5. Or he can do plans where he just plays a quick e5 and is ready to pitch yet another pawn, often even 2. Like I know this is very common these days, is knight e4 here. And like queen takes a2 and rook d1, queen d5. And white really gives up a ton of pawns but gets a big attack. So I would definitely encourage you to do further study on that if you're interested, but this isn't really my, I guess, area of expertise, if you want to call it that. I'm more of a player that doesn't like getting attacked as much, at least not when there's no real counterplay. You're just trying to win with the pawn. So the moves that I'm really looking at are bishop e7 and knight b d7. So in most cases, they will transpose. Each one of them has merits that the other doesn't. The main line runs something like this. Bishop e7, queen f3, queen c7, castle queenside, knight b d7. And there's merits of playing knight b d7 first, and there's merits of playing bishop e7 first. Some of the merits of knight b d7, for example, are in this position after queen f3, queen c7, castles. Black doesn't really need to quote-unquote waste a move with bishop e7 that he might want to have for something else, like b5. For example, one highly sharp variation goes bishop d3, bishop b7, rook he1, and black would normally get this position where he has to play bishop e7, but that's not necessarily the best move here. Maybe there are better defensive resources. White's probably planning to play something like knight d5. So maybe black will play h6, just trying to eliminate this very well-placed bishop. In any case, that's one of the key points of knight bd7. However, I think this is a less accurate move, because here, I think instead of queen f3, there's two moves that are very interesting. Bishop c4, just trying to put pressure on e6, and queen e2, actually, is quite strong. It looks counterintuitive blocking the bishop, but white will quickly castle queenside, try to push e5 through, maybe play g4, bishop g2. I think white's going to have a great initiative. So if bishop e7 is played, bishop c4 is still possible, but I don't think it's as strong because pressure on e6 isn't as great, because black's bishop is defending it when it wasn't when the knight was on d7. So for example, black might play something like b5, bishop b3, castles. I think black should be doing just fine. And more importantly, queen e2, which is also a very testing move, here is not so strong on account of h6. So white has two moves, bishop takes f6 or bishop h4. If bishop f6, castle queenside, for example, queen c7, black will quickly play knight c6, and I think black has a good game due to his, having the two bishops and a relatively strong hold on the center and not having too many weaknesses for white to attack. And bishop h4 looks very natural. I mean, it's going to let white play g4, g5 sometime if black castles kingside. But it does run into this little move here, knight takes e4, which it's a nice tactic, and I think black can attain a pretty decent position. Bishop takes e7, knight takes c3. So, queen c4. Now, black can't play queen takes e7 because of queen takes c8, but black can play king takes e7, queen takes c3. So if you look at this position, black is up a pawn, but his pawn structure is not amazing. His bishop on c8 is dubious. His king is not so safe. White has the lead in development. I think white definitely has enough compensation for a pawn here, but I don't think more. I think that this position is probably about equal. And that's usually not what white aims to get from the opening. So I think for that reason, queen e2 is not the best here, and that's why I like bishop e7 rather than knight bd7. So here queen f3, and now I think queen c7 is the most accurate move, because if knight bd7, then bishop c4 is now possible. I don't know how strong this really is, but why give white the option? So queen c7, castle queenside. So here, so many times I've seen people play b5. They understand that after e5, black plays bishop b7. So white looked like he was going to win because he attacks this knight and makes a discovered attack on the rook on a8. But after bishop b7, there's no more attack on the rook, and black's attacking the queen. However, after queen g3 here, I think white definitely has a big advantage. For example, d takes c5, f takes c5, knight h5. White will play queen h4, and it's very awkward to see what black's going to do here. For example, something like g6 actually runs into knight takes b5, takes, knight takes, and black is really hard pressed for moves. For example, queen c5, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, knight d6 check, king f8, and probably even just taking the queen now and liquidating into this ending should be very promising for white. Up two pawns, e5 is likely to fall, but I think white will have excellent prospects by pushing his queenside pawns. So black is not yet ready to play b5. He will be shortly, so he should play knight bd7 here. Now, let's say white just plays a silly move like a3, b5. If white plays e5 here, bishop b7, queen g3, this just doesn't work. Black's got too many pieces attacking e5. So in this position, there are two main moves for white. There is g4, and there is bishop d3. So I'm going to look at g4 first. There's a lot of ways for black to try to combat this move. I think h6 is one very reliable way, and there's lots of things white can do here in response, like h4 even is interesting. But I think the most principled continuation is bishop takes f6. And now knight takes f6, bishop takes f6 is likely to transpose, and h4. And I think white will will develop a reasonable initiative if black doesn't do much. So bishop takes f6 also has the added merit that if h4, black can play queen b6, putting pressure on this knight on d4 and asking it where it's going to go. For example, knight b3, queen c7, and now he's putting pressure on this knight. So if g5, bishop takes c3, white's pawn structure is going to be ruined. This isn't necessarily the end of the world. I think white definitely still has some chances in a position like this one, where the open d file and the play against this pawn on d6, as well as a space advantage on the king side, could be very strong. Actually, in this specific position, black seems to be okay after h takes g5, because white can't take back with the h pawn because his rook hangs. But after f takes g5, black will play king e7, quickly play knight e5, and white's got a lot of weaknesses. But in general, that's something that you shouldn't necessarily be too afraid of. White can also try to take back with the b pawn here, and this might be tactically better, because now this is possible. It's messy, but I think that white should be okay here. Black's got a nice looking queen, but it really doesn't do that much, and he's under a lot of pressure. So I think that one of the main tries for black, another big try for black here, is in this position to play g5. And there's a lot of interesting lines here. H takes g5, h takes g5. I think even e5 is a reasonable move here. And the idea is if d takes e5, rook takes h8, bishop takes h8, and now actually knight takes e6, and now queen h1, white will quickly play queen h5, and black's defenses are possibly going to crumble very quickly. So that's another way of playing against this. But I think black probably can equalize after h4, queen b6. So another key move for black that historically has been huge is b5. Bishop takes f6. This is white's whole plan, to play a quick g5. So here, knight takes f6 is normal, but one move I really looked into is actually a g takes f6. Yeah, this is a very interesting move, because now white can't really play g5, and black's planning to play bishop b7 and castle on the queen side. So if white just plays moves like h4, bishop b7, maybe now g5, black can just say, have fun. And so I've got the two bishops, I'm pretty solid, and my position's okay. So in this position, white should change his plan and play f5 here. And now there's two moves. There's knight c5 and knight b6. I like knight c5. My plan is just to play b4, kick this knight away, and play bishop b7, hit this pawn, and try to play e5 someday when it's not going to allow white to play knight d5. I think white's best move here is a3, just stopping b4. And one interesting try for black here, actually, the best move, in my opinion, is rook b8. It looks kind of unnatural, but black's still just trying to push through with b4 and open the b file. And if he does something more natural, like bishop b7, white will play b4, and this pawn on e6 goes, the entire black position is probably going to go. For example, knight d7, f takes e6 just looks devastating. So that's very interesting. One other thing I should point out in that is, if white just tries to attack like a caveman g5, just playing queen h5 check, I think black can just castle here and has a reasonably comfortable position. His king is a little open on the g file, but it's hard to see how white's going to do too much. Black's got a very nice bishop, and I think that black can approach the future with a reasonable level of confidence. But it's much more normal to play knight takes f6. It's been played many, many, many times. It's the move I'm playing mostly nowadays also. So white plays g5, knight d7, and f5. So many of you are probably saying, well, what about this? There's bishop takes g5. I take a pawn with check, and it just looks very silly. I'm improving my bishop. Well, at first glance, that's what it might look like. But after king b1, we realize that black has some concrete problems to deal with. Like, he has to deal with this pawn somehow. There's, it's very hard for him to find a move. For example, castles, f takes e6, this runs into some trouble after like queen g4, basically attacking absolutely everything. There was actually a famous game, Rajabov Cheparinov. It's well annotated in ChessBase if you search for that. So bishop takes g5, king b1, and we have to do something about this pawn on e6. So knight f6 looks nice at first, but after something like f takes e6 and e5, now really clamping down on this long diagonal, really black's going to be in a world of hurt. And if e takes f5, well, knight d5, I mean, this is just really looking bad. White's going to have some monstrous knights. So I think the best move for black here is knight e5, attacking the queen and adding reinforcement from the bishop to e6. So white plays queen h5, attacking this bishop and pinning the critical g6 pawn. So white will play black's best move is queen e7, and now white can take e6. It's a tough decision on how to take it. I think knight takes e6 is the best move because if f takes e6, g6, king e takes f7 check, king takes f7, queen e2. This is all forced. Bishop g4, queen f2, queen f6, and I think this endgame should be pretty okay for black. He'll quickly play knight c4 and bishop e5 with a very powerful bishop and a kingside pawn majority where he's likely to make a passed pawn and white will have some trouble making a pawn on the queen side. So for that reason, I think it's important to get this position where the same position where the knight on d4 and the bishop on c8 have been traded. So here, there is no bishop g4 for black after a move like queen e2. So and then we get a position like this one, and it's very interesting. At first glance, it looks absolutely wretched for black because white's going to play knight d5 and h4, h5. But for example, knight d5, there's many moves I think, but I think the two best are queen d8 and queen a7. Let's say queen a7 for now. h4, bishop h6. If white just plays h5, I mean rook a f8. I'm not quite sure where white's real attack is after something hg6, hg6. My king's looking pretty safe on g7 actually, because white has no pieces around it and black has 4 pieces around it. Meanwhile, black didn't invade to f2, and I think black has a reasonable position here. And I think white can probably get a slight advantage by playing queen h3 if he knows exactly what he's doing, but most people won't. And I think that this is a fine position for black to play. It's very double-edged, and he can definitely play for a win. But this is not even the main line. We're not even getting close. Black's move is knight c5 here. That's far and away the most common. So here white plays f6, takes, bishop f8, and rook g1, which looks a little bit bizarre, but white's plan is really just to play rook g7, which is going to be a funky-looking move, but it's very hard to deal with. And black actually is going to have some trouble moving because, for example, if black plays a natural-looking move like bishop b7, rook g7, and then after, let's say, castles, let's play bishop h3, it's never really a good idea to take this and giving white such a powerful passed pawn. Well, knight takes e6 is threatened now, knight d5 is threatened. There's a lot of things that could happen to black here. Actually, after rook g1, the main line is h5, just trying to get some breathing room for this rook. And it's a very sharp position. Black's very solid, but white often will have to sacrifice a knight on d5 to open some lines. It's very rich in variations, but a little too theoretical for my taste. I like the positions after black plays bishop takes g5 check instead. So that's one key line. The other main line in this position is bishop d3. So at this point, black plays b5, white will play rook he1. I alluded to this position earlier where black had left out bishop e7. And here there's a lot of interesting moves, but I think one really interesting one is knight d5. And for example, knight takes d5, e takes d5. I should point out e takes d5, knight f5 is just asking to be killed. Black can't castle right now, and white will play e takes d5 next move with a monstrous attack. And if black tries to close this up, well, good luck. This bishop is just going to go. For example, like bishop takes e4, queen takes e4. It's just white is has a huge attack, and black should really be worried about his prospects for the future. For example, let's say probably has to castle here because a8 is hanging too, and queen e7 is going to be checkmate. So after castles, knight takes e7 check, king h8, rook d3, queen takes h7 is cute, but actually a very serious threat and very hard for black to deal with. For example, h6, rook h3, it just looks like it's going to be over. And knight f6 loses immediately as well to bishop takes and rook h3. So that's. But after knight d5, I think black should take with the knight and then play bishop takes g5. So there's some wild variations here. White plays rook takes e6 check, which is just a crazy move. Black must take it. Queen h5 check. And now g6 is the only move because if king e7, queen takes g5 check, takes another piece and is just going to get to the same position again because black has no better square to go. Because if knight f6, queen takes g7 is devastating. And black really has no squares. If king f7, d takes e6 wins another piece, and if king e8, just we got the same position again, except black doesn't have a bishop. And if black goes to f8 or to d8, knight takes e6 check, we'll just pick up the queen. So g6 is the move. Bishop takes g6, fg6, hg6. And now, if white plays queen takes g6 check here, I think king e7, black can probably survive. It's very dangerous, but after queen takes e6, king d8, I'm not sure where the rest of white's attack is. So here white should take back some of the material with queen takes h8 and knight f8. Knight takes e6, bishop takes f4, sacking a piece back, and knight takes f4, castle queenside. We get a position where white has 2 pawns for a piece, but black's king is never going to be safe. White's likely to take this g6 pawn and get 2 connected passers. And it's, I think, dynamically very balanced, but I'd be happy to play this for black any day. So that's a key line there, but the move that I actually like in this position after bishop d3 is now we play h6. So I'm going to allude to this later in some later videos where black is going to play h6 very early on, but I think the point of h6 here is now to put a question to this bishop. Bishop takes f6 looks somewhat counterintuitive because now black can develop this bishop on d7, and he still has reasonable control of all the key squares. For example, if rook e1, bishop e7, I'm not sure where white's hoping to attack. And black will quickly castle queenside. It's a fine move, there's no question, but I think that bishop h4 is maybe more testing. And then at this point, black will play g5. So when I first show this to people, they usually look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what are you doing? You're just hanging a pawn where your king might want to castle. Well, sure, but actually what happens here is after f takes g5, knight e5, white queen has to find a move, which is not easy at all. I should point out that I'm sure tons of people are going to want to sacrifice their queen. G takes f6, knight takes f3, g takes f3. White has 2 pieces and a pawn for the queen, but I hate to break your heart. It's just not quite adequate. Black will play bishop f8. And just bishop d7, castle queenside. He should be okay. So the queen has to find a good square here, which is actually really easier said than done. It's quite hard to do. I think queen e2 is the best move. And then knight g4, and black's going to play h takes g5. He's going to get his pawn back. He's got a nice stronghold on e5 for his knight, and he'll quickly play bishop d7 and castle queenside. And I think that this is quite a good way for black to play. Play knight f3. Black plays h takes g5. So white can take this pawn back with bishop takes g5, but I think in this position, queen c5, black gets enormous positional compensation for the pawn, because right now knight f2 is threatened, so white has to take care of that. But if he plays a move like rook f1, knight takes d3, and queen takes g5 is another threat. The only way for white to cover both of these is knight h3, and now let's say bishop d7. When you look at this position, white does have an extra pawn, yes, but which pawn is it? It's this pawn. Is this pawn ever going to move? I mean, this rook is holding down this knight. It's because if this knight ever moves, then h2 is going to be hanging. Black will quickly castle queenside and play rook dg8. He's got an amazing knight on e5. White's bishop is garbage. White's pawn on e4 will quickly be under attack. And white just won't be able to untangle those pieces. I think black has more than enough for a pawn here, and it's probably already a little bit better. A lot of the games in chess space, black's just winning these positions. So a better move for white is bishop g3, trying to put pressure on this knight on e5. And here I think the best move is knight takes f3, g takes f3, knight e5. Queen takes f3 is possible as well, something like knight e5, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook df1, hitting this pawn, and rook h7. And white can play hyper-aggressively with things like g4 takes and queen g4. And it's an interesting position, but I think black should probably be okay. For example, maybe even rook h8 here, or bishop f8. There's many moves. Many of you might be concerned about black's doubled pawns in positions like these, but really these doubled pawns are good because they control a lot of really important squares. Like someday, one of black's biggest ideas is to play like rook h4 to f4, which is going to be an excellent rook lift, blocking the open file and getting ready to recapture with the e-pawn and giving black some good play along the long diagonal, a1 to h8. And in the meantime, white's pawns on the queen side, while they're, I guess technically speaking, better structured, it's very hard to see how they will advance. So after bishop g3, I actually played a game where I played bishop d7, which I don't think is the best move, but it's definitely interesting. In that game, white played h3, knight f6. I think if white plays bishop e5 and knight g5, he might get, I'm not sure black gets quite enough for a pawn, but he really does get a good chunk of play. I'd be happy to play this position. There's just good compensation. So in the game, knight takes e5 and h4, takes, and castle queenside, and I ended up getting a better position, but I couldn't quite put it away, and the game ended in a draw. So I'd actually like to take this opportunity to go back a little bit to an early position. After queen f3, another move that's been tried here is h6, trying to put immediate question to this bishop, where if it takes f6, bishop takes f6, we'll get a variation similar to the one we just saw, except black will play queen c7 and knight c6 instead of knight d7, which is a more active square. And if white plays bishop h4, then he can't avoid this variation we just looked at after something like this if he plays bishop d3, if he wants to play the bishop d3 line. However, I think unfortunately for black, bishop e2 is very strong here. And the point is that now black cannot play g5, or not as well, because after takes, knight e5, queen e3, this g4 square, which the knight hopped into when the bishop was on d3, is now covered, and black will have a hard time taking his pawn back. And if b5 in this position, I believe bishop takes f6 is very strong. It's very awkward for black to recapture this. If bishop takes f6, knight, I think the move bishop takes b5 is very strong. And white will play, after a takes b5, knight d takes b5, followed by knight takes d6 check and e5. He's going to have 3 pawns and a huge attack for the piece. And if black plays knight takes f6, white plays e5, and bishop b7, queen g3, takes, knight d7. So now white should not play queen takes g7 here, because black plays queen takes e5, forcing a queen trade and probably equalizing, or not giving an advantage. But he should play knight takes e6, f takes, bishop h5 check. Black obviously can't go to the f file, so he has to go to d8, queen takes g7, forcing rook f8, bishop g4, and white has a huge initiative. Black will never really be fully safe. White's got currently 2 pawns for the piece, is ready to pick up a third on e6 or h6, and is going to have a big attack, and I don't think this is how black can play. So for that reason, black can't really do the h6 line early. He's got to wait till white actually commits his bishop to d3. So that is going to sum up my part 1 of the bishop g5 lecture. Thanks.